redemption, but it is a psychopathic hymn with a point. And that's what I think gives it some merit, that it does look, frankly, at where our obsession with technological violence may lead us.
From Crash by J.G. Ballard. In his vision of a car crash with the actress Elizabeth Taylor, Vaughan was obsessed by many wounds and impacts. By the dying chromium and collapsing bulkheads of their two cars meeting head-on in complex collisions endlessly repeated in slow-motion films. By the identical wounds inflicted on their bodies. By the image of windshield glass frosting around her face as she broke its tinted surface like a death-born Aphrodite. By the compound fractures of their thighs impacted against their handbrake mountings. And above all, by the wounds to their genitalia. Her uterus pierced by the heraldic beak of the manufacturer's medallion. His semen emptying across the luminescent dials that registered forever the last temperature and fuel levels of the engine.
Spectacles of ultra-violence that we see in present-day cinema wouldn't be possible without the technology that drives them forward. They tap a very different set of needs and drives in our minds. And of course, that's what I'm primarily concerned with. I'm not singing the praises of the washing machine or the coffee grinder. I'm much more interested in what happens when our imaginations come into play. I mean, when one thinks about Crash, the important thing is to distinguish between the fact that, obviously, car crashes are not sexually exciting. I've been in a car crash and there was no sexual excitement involved whatsoever. But the idea of car crashes is sexually exciting. Now that's a very different, a more serious matter in a way. The fact that we find the spectacle of car crashes, or the thought even of car crashes, sexually exciting, or at least appealing to our emotions on one or other levels. Now that is a much more sinister and worrying phenomenon, but there's no doubt that it's true. Otherwise, hundreds of American films churned out by Hollywood, or virtually, every year, would not be full of violent car crashes or violent killings.
But it's interesting the way that your interest, some would say even bravery in approaching these issues, has often resulted in a judgment of yourself. I mean, one of the classic reviews of Crash was this man is beyond mental curative powers. He cannot be psychiatrised. He is, terminally insane. You can understand the way that when you write about this stuff, it beams into you.
That was the publisher's reader, who was herself the wife of a well-known psychiatrist, and her report was, the author is beyond psychiatric help. And I thought at the time, well, that represents complete artistic success. Because since I'd adopted the sort of Jonathan Swift modest proposal approach, I thought, well, that I've succeeded if she believes that, because I know that I'm not in any way beyond psychiatric help. I don't even need any psychiatric help. I knew that I'd pulled it off as far as I was concerned. In fact, I'd never read the book since I wrote it. Since reading the proof, I've never read the book. I mean, it's far too frightening. I mean, it wasn't. It was a kit of desperate measures in a way.
I was reading through a selection of your short stories and novels. There's a lot of dissection. There's a lot of detailed appreciation of the human body and its physiology, even in autobiographical novels right up to The Kindness of Women. Is this to do with the fact that you were trained as a doctor?
Yes, it is. I mean, I never completed my medical studies because the pressures to become a writer were just too great. And I felt I'd taken enough from the first couple of years when I was studying anatomy in particular, but also physiology. to give me a stock of metaphors, because I had this wonderful 2 years of studying medicine gave me this wonderful treasure store of metaphors and similes based on the human body that I've gone on using throughout my fiction. And I've always felt that, you know, having dissected cadavers, which is a very moving experience. Profoundly moving experience to dissect a cadaver. I mean, when I was a medical student, most of the cadavers were donated by doctors before their deaths, and it was a great tribute to the spirit of these dead physicians, mostly men with a few women, that they were prepared to endow their bodies so that the next generation, their successors, could be trained, particularly as they knew what would happen to those cadavers, that they would end up as a little clutch of bones and gristle, like the sort of remnants of a Sunday roast, and that their flesh would, you know, endure for many months the sort of ribald humour of the dissecting room. I think it was a great, you know, tribute to these men and women, that they gave their bodies, you know, to the next generation of doctors, and I was well aware of it as I dissected them. And of course, you're in intimate contact with a human being in a way that you can never be otherwise, because you're literally dismantling the flesh. I mean, you dismantle a face, revealing the layers of muscles that make up the everyday expressions of pleasure and surprise and anger. You see the machinery of the emotions. That's very instructive in its own right, and it taught me to respect the human body and the human spirit that lies behind it. A lesson I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And it meant a lot to me in particular, because, of course, only a few years beforehand, 3 or 4 years beforehand, I'd seen thousands of bodies on the streets of Shanghai and in the battlegrounds around Shanghai. I mean, I'd seen them since my earliest childhood, since the age of 7, since 1937, when there was bitter fighting all around Shanghai. And we'd go out and look, like tourists, to look at the battlefields, and we'd see the mutilated dead lying in the fields, legs waving in the canals. And becoming a medical student, I felt I was sort of redeeming some of those meaningless dead lying in those wretched paddy fields. So it was a profoundly moving experience, one I hope I've reflected in my writing.
From the Atrocity Exhibition by J.G. Ballard. In a sense, Dr. Nathan explained to Kirster, one may regard this as a kit which Talbot has devised, entitled Karen Novotny. It might even be feasible to market it commercially. It contains the following items. 1, a pad of pubic hair. 2, a latex face mask. 3, 6 detachable mouths. 4, a set of smiles. 5, a pair of breasts, left nipple marked by a small ulcer. 6, a set of non-chafe orifices. 7, photo cutouts of a number of narrative situations, the girl doing this and that. 8, a list of dialogue samples of inane chatter. 9, a set of noise levels. 10, descriptive techniques for a variety of sex acts. 11, a torn anal detrusor muscle. 12, a glossary of idioms and catchphrases. 13, analysis of odor traces.
Science fiction, SF, it's a term which is often freighted with embarrassment, both for those who own up to liking it and for those who own up to practicing it. Do you want to be known as even partly an SF writer at the end of your career?
Well, I certainly did write science fiction when I started out. Given my interests in science and technology, given my interests in change, because the 1950s were a time of tremendous change. the blueprint of the world we live in now